Pokémon cards have been around longer than most people watching this video have been alive.
But did you know that when they were first released in Japan back in 1996, they weren't even called Pokemon cards? Say hello to Japanese Bandai Cardass. A funny name in English, but in Japanese, Cardass roughly translates to vending machine cards. These cards were produced by the Japanese toy company Bandai and were available only in small vending machines often placed on shop counters. The first set, the green version, was released in September of 1996 and was followed by the red version in October. These sets contained the first Pokemon cards ever made, including Charizard's rookie card, designed by the iconic Ken Sugimori. Plus, these cards weren't even put into packs. You just pulled them straight out of the vending machine. Bad binder behavior, as Deep Pocket Monster would call it. Obviously, this made getting high-quality versions of these cards, like, virtually impossible, which is why the top Charizard from this set sells for over $10,000 at a PSA 10 today. The craziest part? Back in the day, you could buy 5 Bandai Cardass cards at a time for a total of 67 cents. The second time Pokemon cards ever appeared were with their first ever promo cards made for the CoroCoro magazine. Then the floodgates for the franchise opened. On October 20th, 1996, history was made. Pokemon released the first ever official set, which was known as the Expansion Pack, more commonly known as Base Set. The set had 102 cards and 16 were holographic, including the most iconic Charizard card ever. And there was actually a print error on the first run of these cards, making a no rarity symbol subset that has sent collectors hunting since. This was a smash hit in Japan and laid the foundation for its eventual global explosion. But there was still a lot more time until that happened. In 1997, the year I was born, the first ever Mew promo card was released. Pokemon Jungle, the second set ever created, was released in June of 1997 and introduced an iconic aspect of Japanese vintage cards. Each and every booster pack contained one holographic card. This made the set much smaller and made opening the packs much more exciting. What happened next confused collectors for 28 years. In 1997, Japanese Top Sun cards were released, but when these cards were later cataloged and graded by popular companies Beckett and PSA, they were erroneously marked as cards from the year 1995. Which mistakenly gave them the title as the first Pokemon cards ever printed, when in reality the manufacturer just wasn't able to get the license to make these Top Sun Pocket Monster cards until 1997. Either way, these packs released alongside packs of gum and have become some of the most sought after cards in the entire world, with the Top Sun Blueback no-number Charizard becoming one of the most expensive cards ever. That's not all. The sets Mystery of the Fossils and Rocket Gang also released this year, with Rocket Gang featuring the first ever trainer holographic, super rare card, and dark Pokemon. Like the iconic Dark Dragonite, Dark Charizard. That Dark Dragonite's one of my favorite cards ever printed. Then the single most iconic and most expensive card in the history of Pokemon was released at the end of this year. The first Pokemon illustration contest happened and winners received a copy of the famous Pikachu Illustrator card. It was designed by Atsuko Nishida, who happened to be the original designer of Pikachu, and this card, the Illustrator Pikachu, is most infamously known by the $5 million purchase by Logan Paul. Even the first ever Pokemon tournament happened this year, and winners were given the first ever Pikachu trophy cards, which have achieved some of the highest sales in Pokemon card history. 1998 was a quieter year for Pokemon, seeing only a handful of major releases. The Leaders Stadium set released in July, and Challenge of the Darkness in October, and the first ever Anniversary Birthday Pikachu promo card. Then 1999 hit, and what would happen would change the world forever. With the massive hype and popularity of the anime and the original Game Boy games of 1998 in the United States, it was only a matter of time until cards made the jump across the pond too. And in January of 1999, that finally happened. Only a few years after their initial release in Japan, Pokemon cards were produced and sold for the first time in the English language in America. The popular card manufacturing company Wizards of the Coast, which was responsible for the original Magic the Gathering game, got the rights to produce Pokemon cards in English, which was a huge freaking deal. Wizards made a couple of key changes to the original Japanese base set cards, including new designs on the back of the cards and the first edition symbols. They printed base set in 3 different expansions: first edition, Shadowless, and Unlimited. All the cards from the first edition expansion were tagged with the iconic little first edition tag on each card. And the Shadowless version was the same exact design as first edition base set, just without the first edition tag. Then the Unlimited cards were similar to the Shadowless, except they had a drop shadow to the right of the little Pokemon art box. From this set, we got some of the rarest and most expensive Pokemon cards ever made, including the first edition base set Shadowless Charizard. Also this year was the original Pokemon Snap contest, which would produce more of Pokemon's rarest cards ever, like the $87,000 Gyarados. In June, the English version of Jungle was released. This vibrant set introduced non-holographic rare versions of cards for the first time ever. Basically, you could not pull a non-holographic Charizard in base set, but you could get a non-holographic Snorlax in Jungle. 1999 also saw the first ever English promo card released, the Pikachu promo, and in October, the next set, Fossil, was released. It featured amazing prehistoric artwork and designs, and fun fact, the English version of the set did not feature the Mew card, which was only available in the earlier Japanese version. The year 2000 was not only a new century, but a huge year for Pokemon cards. Except for the first release of the year, Base Set 2. This was basically just a reprint of cards in Base Set and Jungle and has historically been one of the least popular vintage sets ever. April saw the release of Team Rocket, one of the most popular from the original Generation 1 sets. Team Rocket brought a ton to the English TCG, including the first Secret Rare cards. Secret Rares are cards whose collection number is greater than the listed number of cards in the set. The iconic Ancient Mew promo card was released and given to people attending the Pokemon movie in theaters. Then we saw Gym Heroes release with several other banned cards and the first ever trainer-owned Pokemon cards, which featured a picture of the trainer on the bottom right corner of the card. This set was followed by Gym Challenge, which would officially become the final Generation 1 Pokemon card set, because in December of 2000, the first ever Neo era set would release, Neo Genesis. This introduced Generation 2 Pokemon into the TCG for the first time ever, and had new typings, baby Pokemon, new tool cards, and more. Neo Genesis had 111 cards inside with 19 holos, including the absolutely iconic Lugia holographic card. Dark and Metal typings were introduced for the first time along with baby Pokemon, which had special abilities to help compensate for low HP and add a new layer of strategy to the actual game. And another banned card was born, Miltank. Sorry, Deep Pocket Monster. 2001 continued the release of these Neo sets and brought an incredibly exciting new feature. Shiny Pokemon. Neo Discovery released in June and had really nothing super special going on inside of it. August saw some iconic promo card releases like Flying Pikachu, Surfing Pikachu, and the Pokemon Snap Pikachu. And in September, Neo Revelation made its glorious debut. This set introduced Shiny Pokemon into the TCG for the first time ever. And as a nod to the main series games, Magikarp and Gyarados were given the honor of being the first shiny Pokemon. There were two cards you could get with them, Shining Magikarp and Shining Gyarados. And when they released in Japan, their prices skyrocketed. These cards changed the meta in the actual Pokemon TCG game and also became a top hunt for collectors. 2002 might have gone down as one of the greatest years in Pokemon card history, and the sets released this year would become some of my personal favorites ever, so maybe I'm a little biased. It started in February with the set Neo Destiny. There was a lot that happened in this one. For starters, it was the last English set to feature the first edition stamp. Light Pokemon were introduced for the first time, and it featured an incredible collection of shiny Pokemon cards, including the first ever shiny Charizard Pokemon card ever printed, which is one of my favorite cards ever and one of the most expensive cards you can still pull today. Neo Destiny was also the last Neo set ever printed, so hey, save the best for last, right? Then in May, Legendary Collection dropped. It was named this instead of Base Set 3 due to the backlash that Pokemon got for Base Set 2. Legendary Collection introduced reverse holographic cards and an incredible new fireworks foil. Definitely one of the most unique vintage sets. A new era of TCG began in September of 2002 with the Expedition Base Set release. This was the e-reader era, and it was about to get crazy. Although it wouldn't last long, unfortunately. It would bring e-reader cards, TM cards, no first edition stamps, different amounts of cards per pack, and it would be the last appearance of Kadabra until 2023. Expedition Base Set was also the first ever Pokemon card set that allowed people to use the Nintendo e-readers to do things like view the Pokédex data, play a mini game, play various tunes in a melody box, or activate a hidden attack. Aquapolis would then release in January of 2003, and with it, Crystal Pokemon, which were made famous by the following set, Skyridge. This is a favorite set of many collectors, like Leonhardt, and one that has maintained an insane price over the years. Why? For starters, it was the final set ever released by Wizards of the Coast. After Skyridge, Pokemon went back to the Pokemon Company, and it had some of the best crystal cards ever made, like Charizard and Ho-Oh. Then we make the move into the largest era of vintage Pokemon TCG ever, the EX era. For whatever reason, the Pokemon Company went crazy with this. The first of 15 expansions was EX Ruby and Sapphire, which released in July of 2003 and brought for the first time ever EX cards. 8 to be exact, followed by EX Sandstorm, which had the first ever release of Delta species cards, then EX Dragon, which brought the Dragon type into the Pokemon TCG for the first time ever. In March of 2004, EX Team Magma vs Team Aqua released, bringing new dual-type Pokemon. EX Team Rocket Returns featured 3 Gold Star starter cards that are super expensive to this day, and 2005 changed everything with EX Deoxys, one of the rarest sets ever printed and an impossible set to find a booster box for these days. It has the iconic Gold Star Rayquaza, which is one of the best and most expensive cards ever. It's also important to note that Pokemon's popularity dipped quite a bit during these years, which resulted in less packs, boxes, and cards being printed of these sets, making them more rare over time. EX Emerald was next, followed by EX Unseen Forces, then EX Delta Species, which fully introduced the Delta Species cards. Then in 2006, we saw the release of EX Legend Maker, EX Holland Phantoms with some amazing Gold Star Pokemon, EX Crystal Guardians, then finally EX Dragon Frontiers, which was the last EX set of this incredible run of cards. Pokemon then transitioned into the Diamond and Pearl era in May of 2007. This brought new Generation 4, Level Up Pokemon, and Legend cards. Diamond and Pearl Base was the one that kicked all this off, which was followed by Mysterious Treasures and Secret Wonders later in the year. These sets featured many now huge cards like Charizard, Ho-Oh, Mew, Lugia, and others. Great Encounters was next in February of 2008. Then Majestic Dawn dropped, and with it, some huge cards like Mewtwo and Darkrai. The final 2 sets of the era would go down as some of the best. Legends Awakened would see the Level X Mewtwo card, along with several others. And Stormfront got an amazing Charizard art and 3 shiny Pokemon, Drifloon, Duskull, and Voltorb. 2009 was here, and with it, a brand new era of Pokemon cards. The Platinum Era, which started in February with the Pokemon set Pokemon Platinum. Very fitting. With it came the brand new Pokemon SP, which was a new type of Pokemon, like the Dialga G and Dialga G Level X cards. Rising Rivals was next with the iconic Flying and Surfing Pikachu secret rare cards. Then at the peak of Pokemon's popularity during its resurgence at this time, Supreme Victors was released in August of 2009, and it featured incredibly sought-after cards like Rayquaza Level X, Charizard Level X, and the Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres cards. Platinum Arceus followed and was filled with amazing cards, which included new AR cards. These were a colorful array of several of Arceus's forms. Plus there were shinies you could get like Shinx, and of course, an amazing Charizard to pull. This set was stacked and appreciated wildly in value, with a booster box going for over $8,000 today. Definitely an epic finale to one of the smallest eras in Pokemon history. The next era began in the next decade, 2010, with the release of Heart Gold, Soul Silver. This is around when Pokemon began to release the video games alongside the Pokemon card sets, which definitely helped with the hype of both. What a fun concept, to catch a brand new Pokemon in a video game, then collect it in real life. This set specifically would also introduce Pokemon Prime and Pokemon Legend. Pokemon Legend cards featured legendary Pokemon and consisted of 2 cards, a top and a bottom half. Prime cards were much more powerful in battle and featured a bold new look, and the cards overall looked much different than past sets. And the set itself was a banger to kick off the era. This set was followed by Unleashed in May, which was another period of renewed popularity in the franchise, and the Steelix Prime card from it became a staple in competitive play. Undaunted was up next, followed by the final set in the Heart Gold Soul Silver era, Triumphant. And the era went out with a bang, with Mew and Gengar Prime cards and Legend cards featuring Darkrai, Cresselia, Palkia, and Dialga. In February of 2011, a one-off set would release that would become one of the most popular sets ever. Call of Legends, a set that is also technically its own era, released with one key new amazing thing: shiny Pokemon. Sure, they had been around for nearly a decade at this point, but those were different. At the time, Call of Legends had the most amount of shiny Pokemon in one single set, and they were all legendary. Later that year, the next era would be introduced with the brand new set Black and White. This era would introduce a lot of concepts that we still have today, over a decade later, like Pokemon abilities and full art cards. And actually, fun fact, Reshiram and Zekrom became the first ever full art cards in Pokemon history. And once again, the cards themselves got a huge makeover in this era. The card borders were changed back to yellow in English and changed to the gray in Japanese we have now. The set Emerging Powers followed and introduced Pokemon abilities, then the final set of 2011 debuted in November, Noble Victories. There were new trainer mechanics and dual-type Pokemon, plus some cool full arts. 2012 kicked off with an absolute bang with Next Destinies, which introduced one of the most exciting concepts yet: full art EX cards. Shaman, Reshiram, Kyurem, Zekrom, Regigigas, and Mewtwo all released with an incredible full art EX version that got collectors really excited. Dark Explorers followed with more amazing full art EX cards, then Dragons Exalted hit with the incredible Mew and Rayquaza EX and the shiny Rayquaza card, and the year closed out with Boundaries Crossed. This set introduced Ace Spec Trainer cards and featured more amazing hits: 2013 began with Plasma Storm, where Team Plasma was introduced for the first time and had an incredible shiny Charizard card. Then Plasma Freeze released, followed by Plasma Blast, which introduced the unique cracked ice holofoil design. And finally, Legendary Treasures closed out the era with some great cards and a Radiant Collection subset. The next era would begin the more modern side of Pokemon cards, and one filled with incredible sets. Starting in February of 2014 with X and Y. This set and era introduced a brand new Fairy type, Mega Evolution, and Generation 6 into the Pokemon TCG. Then one of the most iconic Charizard sets ever released, XY Flashfire. Out of the 106 unique cards in the set, 7 were Charizard, with the biggest ones being the Charizard EX and Mega Charizard EXs. Furious Fists was next, which focused on fighting-type Pokemon, then Phantom Forces, which introduced Spirit Link cards for the first time, then the banger set, Primal Clash, released in February of 2015. And what a way to ring in the new year! This set featured Primal Reversion for the first time and the brand new Primal Kyogre and Groudon. And what followed it up did not disappoint. XY Roaring Skies, released in May of 2015 and featured amazing Dragon-type Pokemon like Rayquaza. Ancient Origins was up next with incredible shiny Primal and Mega Pokemon cards like Rayquaza. And the new Pokemon Break cards were introduced for the first time ever in the next set, XY Breakthrough. Although they weren't that popular though. Still aren't. But this was the first set of 2016, which was exciting. What was more exciting was the 20th anniversary set, Generations. This was to celebrate Pokemon's 20th anniversary and featured popular EX reprints, the return of the Radiant Collection, and a mythical Pokemon card. It was also the first time a set was ever printed specifically to celebrate the anniversary of Pokemon. Once the birthday candles for Pokemon were blown out, the next few sets were released. Fates Collide and Steam Siege, which is known as one of the worst sets ever, although it's still super expensive. But it was followed up by one of the best sets, XY Evolutions. Evolutions paid homage to the original base set and was basically just a big reprint of it, which included the original base set holographic Charizard design in both a holo and a reverse holo. Not only was this an amazing set, but it was the last of the XY era. Sun and Moon would be next and would shake up the TCG quite a bit. In Japanese, God packs would be introduced for the first time ever, which were extremely rare packs that featured all hits inside. This generation also saw the release of Generation 7, GX cards instead of EXs, and Rainbow Rares. The first set, Sun and Moon Base, was released in February of 2017, and with it, GXs and Rainbow Rare cards. Guardians Rising followed with a huge array of 15 different Rainbow cards. Then one of the most popular sets from the era, Burning Shadows, released. This set remains so popular to this day because of the incredible Rainbow Rare Charizard GX card inside. That is notoriously impossible to pull. Shining Legends was up next and became another top set from this era. For the first time in over 10 years, Shining Pokemon were back. And they looked good, like the Mew and the Rayquaza. The next few sets were interesting enough, with Ultra Prism getting the first full art gold Pokemon cards featuring Lunala and Solgaleo GX, and introduced Prism Star cards. Forbidden Light was cool, Celestial Storm had a Rainbow Rayquaza, Lost Thunder with the Lugias. Then in January of 2019, the best set from the entire era released, Team Up. For the first time ever, Tag Team Pokemon were introduced, and remain some of the most expensive cards from this entire era, like the Latios and Latios GX card. Unbroken Bonds followed up with a Rainbow Charizard, Unified Minds featured Mew and Mewtwo, and Hidden Fates made Pokemon history. This was the first ever shiny set, and featured 94 unique shiny Pokemon cards, including some fan favorites like the Charizard GX, which was the shiny version of the Burning Shadows Rainbow Rare, which is something that began to happen more often. Since there were so many different versions of Pokemon cards, the Pokemon Company could use the same exact art in multiple different ways, something we would see a lot more of in the future. Sun and Moon came to a close on November 1st of 2019 with the set Cosmic Eclipse, which featured beautiful tag team Rainbow Rares like Charizard and Braixen, Reshiram and Zekrom, Arceus, Dialga, and Palkia, and amazing full art cards like the Pikachu. 2020 was a new decade and a brand new era of Pokemon cards, the Sword and Shield era, which would see a massive resurgence in the popularity of Pokemon, the Logan Paul era, and countless changes to the cards themselves. Generation 8 Pokemon were introduced. V, VMAX, V Union, and V Star cards would replace the old GX cards. Alternate arts, gallery cards, and illustration rares would completely shake up the entire Pokemon card market. And it all started with arguably one of the worst sets from the era, Sword and Shield base set. This set was pretty exciting at the time because it did introduce a couple of new things, but the cards themselves were a bit underwhelming. Same can be said for the next set, Rebel Clash, although it did introduce full art gold shiny Pokemon cards. Then the first Charizard focus set of the era released, Darkness Ablaze, which featured the first ever Charizard V and VMAX cards ever made. And what happened next would change Pokemon forever. You see, around this time, the world was beginning to settle into the COVID pandemic. Tiger King, lack of toilet paper, and grocery store food shortages weren't the only thing that this period was known for. For one reason or another, Pokemon as a franchise saw a massive resurgence in popularity, probably the biggest in franchise history. Maybe it was people looking for nostalgic comfort in a scary world, or there was just nothing better to do. But everything Pokemon this year seemed to explode, from the games to Pokemon Go to the cards themselves. The market for Pokemon cards also erupted, and record-setting sales for nearly every card in every set became daily news. Those stimmy checks were definitely hitting. And to add more fuel to the fire, one of the largest creators at the time, Logan Paul, uploaded a video showing that he spent over $200,000 on one single box of Pokemon cards. This was unheard of, especially to the general public, and it got millions of eyes on these little pieces of shiny cardboard. Around the same time, the set Champion's Path released, and remember when you couldn't find a single Pokemon card in a store anywhere? And if you happened to stumble upon that beautiful golden Champion's Path Charizard Elite Trainer box, it was like finding gold. The main hunts, the Rainbow Rare Charizard VMAX and the Shiny Charizard V. Their pull rates were extremely low too, which means there weren't that many in the market, which means the market really wanted them. These cards and boxes were expensive, but not as expensive as the vintage Pokemon cards from the early 2000s were getting at this time. Logan Paul had uploaded another video showing him spending $150,000 on one single Pokemon card, a PSA 10 first edition Charizard from base set. This cemented the idea that Pokemon cards were valuable in the minds of millions, and the effect it had on the card market was actually insane. People began buying up and opening vintage Pokemon card packs and boxes trying to find these old and rare cards, and it was all just more and more fuel on an already raging fire. This could be considered the greatest boom in Pokemon card history, but it's not the end of their story. Vivid Voltage would release in November with the Rainbow Rare Chonkachu everybody went crazy for. Shining Fates kicked off 2021, which was a continuation of the Hidden Fates set from Sun and Moon, and inside, the Shiny Charizard VMAX, which was another huge hit. Battle Styles was next, and although it was a sorta unpopular set with the masses, it introduced some new cool things. Single Strikes and Rapid Strike cards changed up the meta in the actual game, and probably the most important change in the entire era was introduced: alternate art cards. In Battle Styles, the first alt arts were Empoleon V, Rapid and Single Strike Urshifu V and VMAXs in the iconic Sleeping Tyranitar V. These cards would pave the way for the entire future of the Pokemon TCG. Chilling Rain followed, which would be nicknamed Chilling Pain for the extremely low pull rates. But this set went crazy. There were 13 unique alternate art cards. Pokemon was definitely leaning into this concept at the time, and the next set would be their best. Evolving Skies released in August of 2021 and would become the most popular and expensive set of the Sword and Shield era. The reason? The cards. This set featured some of the most popular Pokemon of all time, including all the Eevee evolutions, Gyarados, Dragonite, and Rayquaza, and all these cards got incredible alternate art versions that the Pokemon community went berserk for. The most popular of them all? The Moonbryon. To this day, the Moonbryon sells for hundreds to thousands of dollars, and a booster box of Evolving Skies sells for over $400. And it was clear to the Pokemon Company, people loved alternate art cards. The 25th anniversary of Pokemon was celebrated with the next Celebration set in October, which paid homage to some of the most popular cards like Holo Charizard, Shining Magikarp, Mega Rayquaza EX, and others. Fusion Strike came next with more incredible alt arts like Gengar VMAX, followed by Brilliant Stars, a set that brought some big new changes. V-Star cards would be introduced for the first time ever that would eventually replace VMAXs, and for the first time, Trainer Gallery cards were revealed. These were less rare, but still very cool, unique artworks of cards of the specific Pokemon. Basically a way to expand on the popularity of alternate art cards that was more accessible so more people could get them. This was literally considered a subset of Brilliant Stars because there were so many of these trainer galleries. 30 in total. Radiant Pokemon would be introduced in the next set, Astral Radiance, which was the updated version of Shiny Pokemon, and would replace the popular full art golden shiny Pokemon cards of the earlier Sword and Shield sets. But these cards weren't really hard to pull and didn't really catch on with collectors. Neither did the entire next set, Pokemon Go. Although it did feature the first ever peelable Pokemon cards, where you would peel the top of a card off and it would reveal a Ditto disguised underneath. The first ever Trick or Trade set came out in September of 2022, which was basically a set of reprinted cards that were all kind of put into one set with a little Halloween logo on it, meant to be used to be given out to trick-or-treaters on Halloween. Next up was Lost Origin with the incredible Giratina alt art, and Silver Tempest would close out the year 2022 with 6 unique Lugia cards and some amazing alt arts. 2023 began with the end of Sword and Shield. Crown Zenith released in January and would be the last time we would see things like Vs, VMAXs, and other things. In the Japanese version, V-Star Universe, illustration rares, and special illustration rares were introduced for the first time and would pave the way for the next generation of Pokemon cards. And in the English version, we would see the Galarian Gallery release. This era of Pokemon also saw 3 different Japanese sets with God Packs. It was truly one of the most, if not the most iconic eras in Pokemon card history. But the next era was just beginning and it would bring a ton of changes to the Pokemon TCG. Scarlet and Violet began in March of 2023, and with it came Generation 9, guaranteed holos in every pack, the Terra mechanic, Kadabra for the first time in over 20 years, and an entire new rarity system and the return of EX cards. In the first set, Scarlet and Violet base, illustration rare cards were introduced for the first time in English and would replace the Galarian Gallery style cards from Crown Zenith, and special illustration rares would replace the alternate art cards of the Sword and Shield era. Instead of VMAX, V, and V-Star cards, the nostalgic EX cards returned, and this was also the age of the waifu. Around this time, Japanese cards were exploding in popularity. They always had been popular, but typically the English cards were more popular due to a larger global audience. But Japanese cards began to take over the market, with the rares selling for more money in Japanese than in English. Especially the female trainer cards like Miriam in Scarlet and Violet and Iono in Paldea Evolved. This market shift also made special illustration trainer cards much more valuable than they had been before, even more than some of the Pokemon cards. Obsidian Flames released in August of 2023 and was filled with amazing Charizards. Although this set was around the same time that the Pokemon Company began printing way more Pokemon cards, and the pull rates of some of the rarest cards in the set were much higher, which was cool because it gave more people a higher chance of pulling some of the coolest cards, which is most likely angled towards the youth and younger generations that have much lower attention spans. Either way, these new higher pull rates inflated the card supply and resulted in tons of Charizards from the set being pulled fairly easily, followed by one of the greatest sets in modern Pokemon card history, Pokemon 151. Pokemon 151 was a set dedicated to just that, the original 151 Pokemon from Generation 1. But with a twist. Not only did you get the nostalgic cards like Charizard, Alakazam, and Pikachu, but you got them in the new updated rarities and styles. The art rare gallery in the set is absolutely incredible, and the secret illustration rares are even better. Charizard, Venusaur, Blastoise, Alakazam, Zapdos, Erica, and Giovanni all got amazing secret illustration rare versions in the set. And in Japan, Pokemon 151 was even more popular and unique with the introduction of the Master Ball Reverse Holo, which never made it to the English set. Paradox Rift followed, introducing Paradox Pokemon, and the next shiny set, Paldean Fates, is set to release next month, which has become a tradition ever since the Sun and Moon era. Let me know in the comment section below which set and era is your favorite. For me, probably the Sword and Shield era, and the set, Neo Destiny 1st Edition. Thank you for watching the video, see you in the next one.